Recently, I filled out a personality inventory for a program I'm in through the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association that I'm participating in. I was not surprised to find that I, quote, am likely to have less respect for the prevailing customs of the organization than most other managers and executives. It said, you have a willingness to take chances, bend the rules. It suggested that you might need to accept more structure in order to function at your highest level. You might consider the pros and cons of being more accepting of structure in exchange for greater effectiveness or career advancement. Well, it's too late for career advancement. It's never interested me. And I've always found a way to bend the rules personally and professionally, not because I am rebellious, but I'm really a rule follower. You can ask my partner. But because I sought a higher integrity of values in action. And when I was in divinity school, like a long, long time ago, nobody was talking about ministers as CEOs. And systems theory, I never even heard of it. Mission and vision? Well, those were biblical happenings, not something that actually played out in real life. But I've learned a few things along the way. A congregation without a mission or vision ends up chasing its own tail forever, seeking out its identity or purpose. I have even begrudgingly come to respect and see the value of what you here call administry. Again, administration was not a course that was offered in divinity school when I attended, so I've had to learn it kicking and screaming and resisting it all the way. I have become more accepting of structure and organizations, not for career advancement, but for ensuring the health and future of organizations, and in particular, the church. Even when it looks like what I am doing is blowing up the prevailing systems and customs. You all might be surprised to find out that I do not answer to the Board of Trustees, or even to you all as a congregation at large. And the board doesn't answer to y'all either. All of us answer to and are accountable to the mission of this church. Before we do anything in or as a church, we must ask ourselves, does it fulfill our mission? A mission statement defines a congregation's reason for being. It also defines, as former district executive Ann Heller wrote, the good the congregation intends to do, whom it hopes to benefit, and how, and what it claims as its central principles and values. So I want you all to look at the cover of your order of service, and there, I'll give you a second, I love the rustling. And there you will find this congregation's mission statement. You want to transform the world. You want to serve the world. And you want to do so empowered by love. This is what you all have chosen as your benchmark, your compass for acting. It states who you are, what you value, and your reason for being. Something else about mission. It's active. It's lived out. The way the mission of an organization is fulfilled is by articulating a vision. An organization's vision answers the questions, what are your dreams? What do you want the future to look like? A vision takes dreams and turns them into real plans. And to make all of this happen, one has to tap into what Richard Rohr calls our own unique imaginarium. I love that word, imaginarium. An unconscious worldview constructed by our individual and groups' experiences, symbols, archetypes, and memories. And the way that he and I are using the word vision has to do with each and every one of us activating our internal imaginations, creativity, wishes, hopes, and dreams. Visions are future-oriented. Vision is an inner sight that has nothing to do with physical capability. Now, I'm not one who really likes long-range plans. First of all, I can't think very far ahead, and plans can get in the way of living and spontaneity. But in today's ever-increasing rapidity of change, often a long-range plan is outdated or needs to be totally redone before it's even completed. That doesn't mean that we don't engage in visioning. It just means that that time between our visioning and its realization will become increasingly shorter. So I'm in a bit of a hurry with you all. I'm trying to balance the need to respect the structures you have in place and the desire to make you, the church, flexible and elastic enough to do what must be done to live out your vision with power and impact. So here's my vision to ensure that. And being good you can always say, thank you for sharing, Revlo, now moving right along. So a friend of mine's daughter came up to her one morning and said, Mom, this is me, and this is the world. In other words, well, for 13, it makes perfect sense. It's all about me, right? But let us remember also, as my friend's husband said, the trouble with the UUs is that they don't get it's about you rather than me. The Reverend Fred Muir said in his Berry Street lecture that was later printed in the UU World that we as a denomination, as a movement, are in danger of becoming the I Church. That we are actually confused about our first principle. Does anybody know it? The inherent worth and dignity of every person, right? We're going to teach you that song so you can learn them all. In other words, we proclaim that we get to believe what we want and do what we want and declare that our passion or commitment needs to be everybody else's. That's not church, and that's not beloved community. That's what my former colleague called a hot mess. We need to understand our first principle in context of the seventh principle. Does anybody know that one? It's about being connected to all of life, interdependence. In other words, we're all connected. How we act has an impact. We have to be accountable to one another and to something larger than ourselves when we enter into community. We have to be willing to be changed, transformed even, by being in relationship with one another. We are a community, not a group of folks with competing agendas. Every UU church I know thinks of itself as a social justice church. And what that usually means is that there are some folks, a small group, who are unfailingly faithful to a cause or a need. Sometimes their passion, unconsciously and unintentionally, has the opposite effect from what they desire. It excludes rather than invites others to join them. Often these folks become tired or angry and resentful. And research has shown that social justice activists who have a faith foundation are less likely to burn out. It is our faith as Unitarian Universalists that calls us to act for justice, not self-righteous anger. Our religious ancestors changed the social fabric of this country by living out what our faith required of them, to do justice. When we engage in the work of justice making, I want it to come from a place of falling into line with these great faith-filled ancestors. We engage in the work of justice making because our faith will not let us do otherwise. Let us lead with that. And let us support a diversity of efforts in our work, showing up for and supporting one another in this or that effort or cause. We need not champion one justice cause over another, though at times different causes will have surges of urgency that ask us to drop everything and respond. Which brings me to the desire for this congregation to make itself ready for people of color to claim Unitarian Universalism right alongside those of us who are white-skinned.
Amen. Yes.
I am grateful to the quilters who made the Black Lives Matter sign. I am grateful to the seated baguettes, as I call them, the building and grounds folks, who moved that quilt from the side to the center. And my hope is that we will have a Black Lives Matter banner out in front. And if it gets taken down and vandalized, so be it. So be it. I can remember, we will put up another one, and put up another one, and put up another one. As a lesbian, I remember the longing to be able to come home to a faith, not in spite of who I am, but because of who I am. There are people of color who are already in our congregations that are struggling to come home. And they are hurting due to systems of white supremacy and unconscious bias. And there are more still who are waiting to come home to Unitarian Universalism if it will allow them to bring their full selves. Which means that we who are white must ask ourselves deeply, are we willing? And are we ready to be changed and to have Unitarian Universalism transformed by the full inclusion of people of color and what they bring to our faith? Now, before you answer yes too quickly, I beg you to slow down and read and listen to the people of color in our congregations and about their experiences among us, for harm has been done. We must do the work of understanding systemic and personal white supremacy before we prepare a space for people of color. And so I invite each and every one of you to join me and hopefully the board and as many people as possible in this congregation in reading the book called Centering, Navigating Race, Authenticity, and Power and Ministry. It's written by religious professionals of color in our denomination talking about what it's like. And we've ordered 20 copies for folks to buy and share. And I'm not so naive as to think that reading this book will eradicate harm to people of color in our midst. I love runaways. But I'm hopeful that it will help each and every one of us reduce the harm. The poet Adrienne Rich wrote, "Quicksilver spills across the charted systems. We're out in a country that has no language, no laws. We're chasing the raven and the wren through gorges unexplored since dawn. Whatever we do together is pure invention. The maps they gave us were outdated by years." Quicksilver spills across the charted systems of church the way we have always done it. And though the religious impulse is as ancient as the gorges the raven and wren are exploring, the maps given us to do church are out of date by years. For us to be relevant and vibrant as a faith, we will need to be willing to give ourselves over to pure invention. Each and every one of us has to, as Rohr says, enter our imaginarium to create our future. Because he says, you cannot even imagine something or do something until you first have an image of it inside you. In order to learn something radically new, we first need to imagine it. So we have some imagining, some visioning to do, some more rocks to write on. I've heard the term radical hospitality used around the edges of conversations here. And it brought up this book that I read several years ago, written by some Benedictine monks who practice, that is their faith practice, radical hospitality. And this is how they define hospitality. It is a lively, courageous, and convivial way of living that challenges our compulsion either to turn away or to turn inward and disconnect ourselves from others. They go on to write, hospitality requires not grand gestures, but open hearts. This open-heartedness can be extended not just to those who are marginalized, but to one another. And I want to remind you that it is easy to make soup to serve for the homeless. It is far harder to come around from behind the stove or counter and sit at the table with someone who has received our food and open our hearts to receive them. There are those among you who practice this radical hospitality. And I, for one, will be looking to you for help in opening my own heart to practice radical hospitality. At the board retreat in August, after being here all 3 days, I asked the board if instead of focusing on goals, that we could focus on habits. For goals are things that we attain and then they're done, moving right along. But habits are patterns that we develop that may stay with us for a lifetime. I have asked that we focus the year on developing habits of generosity. And this is not code for giving more money. Though you may want to know that we are still in the midst of a capital campaign and that you all passed a deficit budget of $30,000. I'm just saying. But I'm talking about a generosity of the heart and spirit in how we are with one another, in how we create community. Instead of responding to someone with the remark, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, why don't you try on these words? Tell me more about that. To develop a habit of curiosity about others, to find within us the most generous thing we can say in a conversation, rather than just dismissing someone out of hand. How different would this community be if we all committed to developing habits of generosity? My hope is that this habit of generosity, of open-heartedness, will awaken a longing for growth, not just in the numerical sense, as in looking at every possible newcomer the way the duck tour in Seattle does every time it passes a Starbucks with a cha-ching, as a way to increase our budget or pay off the mortgage or solve our budget shortfall. I'm talking about growth, as in moving through the seasons of our religious lives with a desire for constant learning, reshaping, refining. The religion of our childhood, or lack thereof, is not the religion, I hope, of our teens, or our mid-30s, or our 50s, or our 70s, or our 80s. I would guess that many of those early learnings fail us now in our lives. Each season of our lives brings new questions about how we should live. Each season calls forth a reckoning. Our faith is not static, but as the name of our gray hymnal asserts, a living tradition. In other words, Revelation ain't sealed. There's always more to be revealed, whether it be through the academic disciplines, through science, through culture, through prayer and meditation. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and state that part of my vision for this community is that it, like Jeremiah Wright said, unapologetically reclaim itself as a religious and spiritual community. Unapologetically. That it demand a rightful place at the religious tables all over the city and beyond. For we are not a club. We're not a nonprofit. We're not a social group. We're not a forum for lectures. We're about worship and about our faith moving us toward action. We are, you all are, a congregation, a community like other liberal religious denominations who gather together not around a common theology, but around common values. In a world that bombards us with meaningless distractions 24/7, I want us to engage in the religious task of meaning making, of discovering what is of ultimate worth and value. As my colleague up the road in Corvallis, the Reverend Jill McAllister, said to me years ago, religion is about asking the big questions. And spirituality is about how we live into those questions. Or if that doesn't work for you, go back to the root word for religion, which means to bind. To what are we bound at the deepest level of ourselves? And spirituality is for theists and atheists alike and everybody in between. Think of the word spirit. Its roots are all about breath. Spirituality is all about finding the true breath that gives us life, that gives our lives meaning. A former congregant once said to me that he came to church to breathe for 1 hour out of every week, just to be able to breathe. Don't be ashamed to be about figuring out what you are bound to or finding your deepest life-giving breath. Most of all, the top of my list for you all in my visioning is that we embody a love that resists. That when folks from outside the church refer to us, they say, those you use, they're the folks who show up at every demonstration, every protest, every rally in yellow shirts that say, answering the call of love. Love requires a lot of us, as does being a UU. For being a UU, it's a radical act. Being a UU means resisting mainstream enculturation around consumerism, around gender, about sexual identity, about the nature of civil and political discourse, about the idea of borders and human migration, around the value of a human being and other species, and how that's defined and determined, around the value of the earth and our climate, and on and on and on. Being a UU means resisting with love and insisting on the already but not yet vision of beloved community. Lastly, there is an end to this. My vision for you all is that we metaphorically carry one another. We live in times that deceive us into leading with our fears and anxieties. It's easy to succumb. And that's why we must remind one another, as Jason Shelton wrote in a song for a colleague's installation, and the words are, love has already won. And when you can't feel that love, we will hold it for you until you can feel it. When you can't feel that hope, we will lift it up for you. When your faith is lost, we will hold it for you until you can reclaim it. May the vision of connection to community, justice making rooted in faith, engagement with our imaginariums, a commitment to harm reduction for people of color, habits of generosity, reclaiming our religious identity, and the assertion that love has already won and resists, guide us as we seek to fulfill this church's mission of love, transformation, and service. Let us all engage in waking that vision.